I want to say welcome to this particular part of our diversity training. What you'll see in this particular video are some pieces of a discussion that we're actually having about cultural competence and the importance of culture and why we have culture. And so I encourage you to engage this with that thought in mind that this is our question and answer period. And so, as you have questions, think about those, reach out to us. I can be reached at andrecohen.com, and we look forward to seeing what you become.
It's like, ooh, ooh, Kevin. Yeah, so when the house isn't on its foundation, it's floating in all sorts of stuff, right? And then it shows up in inappropriate places. That house is in places it should have never been, right? Because it didn't have its context, its foundation. And so what do you believe is the purpose of culture? Why does culture exist? What is its purpose? Yes, ma'am.
It provides a framework for people to come together,
Okay.
language, tradition.
Okay, so it provides a framework for people to come together. All right. What else?
It provides us a sense of history and where we came from.
Okay, so it provides us a sense of history and where we came from.
Identity.
Okay, it provides a sense of identity.
It tells us how we do things around here.
It tells us how we do things around here. All right, so one of the things that we oftentimes fail to realize is that, and we spend a lot of time talking about culture and cultural competence and all that kind of stuff, but we never spend enough, I don't think we spend enough time talking about the context, right? We don't spend enough time talking about the context by which culture comes. So, let's talk a little bit about farming. Anyone know anything about farming? Or been around farms, grew up, new farmers, or farmers? Okay. So there is a certain kind of culture that happens on a farm, given the farm context, right? So what are some of the things that farmers need to know to be successful in that context? What was that? Weather. So they have to understand weather patterns. What is it? Red sky, morning to morning. Okay, so this is something. All these little things, right? They need to know about animals, right? So how to breed them, how to take care of them. I saw a show where they put this glove on and they put their hand in the cow's behind, and it was deep. Right? So all this stuff they need to know. They need to know about whether they're going to be organic farmers or they're going to use chemicals. How much ransom to pay Monsanto. How much they're going to use different products and all that kind of stuff. So they also have to know about the market, right? When to sell, when not to sell. There are actually certain clothes that are good to wear on a farm. Like, I think an Armani suit might be a little overdressed on a farm. Certainly, you want to wear boots that come all the way up to your shin, because you don't want to get stuff in your boots. And there's a certain kind of language that happens on a farm. They talk about stuff in a certain kind of way. There's even music that is particular to that culture. And what do they call that music? Country music. Not the stuff they play on the radio. That stuff is not country music. That is like R&B smoothed out with a little twang. Like I heard somebody, they were like, some artist was like, and back it up, back it up. I was like, we don't back it up in country music. No backing. No backing. So there's all of this stuff that is the farm culture because of the context, right? So the context drives the culture. Now, if I take an individual from the farm and I put them in downtown Manhattan, what do the people in Manhattan say about this farmer?
They're looking up.
So they're looking up. All right, what else? What's that? That he's a country hick. He's backwards, a bumpkin. You know, Green Acres is the place for me. Farm life. Okay. Am I the only person who's ever watched that show? From far and wide, get that city and give me that country. Something I don't remember the song, but so they would think that he's inadequate, that he doesn't fit, he's a bumpkin, he doesn't know what he's doing, and so forth and so on. So what happens if I do the reverse and I take a kid or a guy from Wall Street or downtown Manhattan and I plop him on a farm in northern Minnesota? What do the farmers say about this guy? That he's snooty. He's clueless. And they may go as far as to say what my grandfather would say about a dog that doesn't hunt. What do you do with a dog that doesn't hunt? You shoot it. Now, I'm not saying we need to shoot animals. I'm against, I'm an animals' rights dude. But that's what my grandfather would say. And he's dead, so we can't punish him. So, dog. Moment of silence. Okay. So those are the things, so context is everything. And so when we see people who are out of context, we typically see behaviors that don't match what we see in our behavior. So when we talk about cultural competence, and so people say, well, this is what the Hmong people do. Well, why do they do that? Because of the context that they come from. Right? Now, here is the trick about cultural competence. I have to be careful when I say this. We have to tell people that they're in a new context. So it's okay for you to bring your stuff, because that's what the Statue of Liberty says, right? So bring me your poor, bring them your stuff, and blah, blah, blah. But know that there's some stuff you're going to have to give up, and then some stuff you have to work with us on building together, right? And so, do I have to know everything about every culture? I would say the more you know, the more empowered you are, just like they used to say that for G.I. Joe. The more you know. But more important is to understand context, because context gives you more information than actually looking at the things that people do. It will be very interesting to see what later generations will think about the fact that people put clothes on their dogs. When they see these artifacts with, like, they have really intelligent animals. They wore clothes and everything. So just to look at what we're doing without having the proper context can lead us astray. So I want to talk a little bit about an out of context problem. Has anyone ever heard of that concept before? Out of context problem. Okay. So why do deer get hit by cars? You ever thought about that? Why do deer get hit by cars or trucks? What's that? Cars are outside of their context. They have no idea what cars are. I mean, did anyone see Bambi? Was there any point where Buck, Bambi's dad, said, Bambi, be careful of that. That's a Ford F-150. Or was there another part where, Bambi's mom, Dawn, is sitting there down and said, now, Bambi, that's a Toyota Yaris. Don't be concerned with that. right? Yeah, those things that happen. So deer get hit by cars because it's outside of their context. It is outside of their awareness. They don't know what that stuff is. And so all too often we end up with cross-cultural conflicts because, I know a guy who, and when he put it this way, I never thought of it. And I was like, ooh, that's kind of disgusting. And he said when he first came to the United States, he was from Haiti. He said he thought that what we ate was disgusting. And I said, well, what in particular? Because there's a lot of stuff to choose from, right? And I said, well, what in particular? He said, you guys have sweet meat. I was like, sweet meat? What are you talking about? I was like, that sounds disgusting. He was like, yes, I thought that was very disgusting. Sweet meat. And I said, well, what does it taste like? He's like, it's usually beef and it has the sauce on it. And I said, barbecue? He said, yes, sweet meat, it's nasty. Right? Out of context. I mean, where he comes from, they don't put the, So I was like, wow, that's interesting. Out of context problems. And so what we have to understand is that the more we're able to put into our context, the more we're able to relate with folks. And if we can get to a point where we understand our own context, we're able to also explore other people's contexts. All right. So there's that. Let me just give you a couple of truths about human beings, and I like this so much I put it in your handout twice. One is that human beings can learn, change, and grow. That if you want to advance the slides, you can. I think it's the next one. Yeah. Human beings can learn, change, and grow. So who I am today is not who I was at 17. Thank God. That people do what they think works even when what? Even when it doesn't work, right? I mean, our county jails are full of people who actually thought it would work. All human behavior is goal-directed, so people are always trying to achieve something or trying to strive for their goals. And we get frustrated when we don't take that as a maxim, right? So, kids will take a cookie out the cookie jar or something, and then we have the audacity to frustrate ourselves and ask them the goofiest question ever, and we say, Jeffrey, why did you take that cookie? And what's Jeffrey's response? I don't know. What he's really saying to us is, I don't know why you're asking me this question, right? Because we know why Jeffrey took the cookie. Why did Jeffrey take the cookie? Because he wanted the cookie, right? So all human behavior is goal-directed. And lastly, that attitude is a reaction to a goal. Attitude is not a thing. It is a side effect. And all too often we get caught up in people's side effects. Example. So I was watching Animal Planet, and they were doing this thing with gorillas. And I like Animal Planet, by the way. It's so cool. And so they were doing this thing, they were in Rwanda, and they were watching the mountain gorillas. And so the silverback is kind of strutting on his territory. And he's, moving leaves and stuff to make sure his area is clearly marked and distinct. And so there's another silverback, a young silverback, who has gotten too close to his area. He sees them, and so he does what silverbacks do to make sure people know about his territory. He looks at them, and it's not a smile. He's not smiling at this other gorilla. And so he's looking at the gorilla, and the gorilla just freezes for a second. And so, and these are 500-pound gorillas. I mean, these are big guys. Have you guys been to the Como Zoo and seen those? I mean, those, just ginormous. And so he looks at them, and the young gorilla is just kind of standing, he's kind of trying to feel them out and see what's going on. And so the older gorilla grabs some grass with a little grimace, and he tears up the grass and throws it up in the air. And the young gorilla is just kind of, he's a little startled. He's like, this guy's kind of aggressive. but he doesn't move. And so he grabs more grass. And so he sees that the young gorilla is not moving, so he decides to show some teeth. So he grabs some grass, throws it up, and he shows some teeth. Ah! And so the young gorilla is kind of like, but I can take him, right? And so the older gorilla sees that the young gorilla is not moving, so he grabs some more grass, he throws in the air, and he shows his teeth. Ah! And this time he adds making noises and beating on his chest. So he's and so the young gorilla is like, oh, this dude is crazy. I am out of here. So why do you think the gorilla went through all that drama? What happens if 2 500 gorillas start fighting? Somebody's going to get hurt. And to get hurt in the forest means death. And so the gorilla gave all that attitude to say, stay back, because I don't want to get hurt. And so sometimes our coworkers or our subordinates or even our clients are kicking up all this attitude because they're saying, you're getting too close to me. You're getting on the inside. I need to be safe, so I'm going to kick out this attitude. And sometimes we get suckered into that, and we get upset because they're upset. Or we get defensive because they're upset. Or we act certain ways because we don't want to deal with the confrontation that they're trying to create. The other thing that we have to understand about attitude is this important point. That attitude typically isn't what we think it is. What have you been taught an attitude is? What is an attitude? Anyone been accused of having an attitude? That's no fair. She's looking around at people like, you say something. You got an attitude right now. Right? So what's an attitude? It's usually negative. It's disrespectful. I would say those are great answers. I would say that those answers, though, would be inappropriate or incomplete for my parents. My parents were, so they were young when we were growing up. They were young when they got married, and so we were going to college with them. And so we became the butt of their jokes, the guinea pigs in their sociology experiments, and all of their alternative behavior methods. We were subject to those things. And so they would use all that stuff with us until it didn't work, and then they go back to what they knew, which was yelling and screaming. And so my dad would, and very intelligent man, but he would just lose it and couldn't, he would get so frustrated that he couldn't complete sentences, and he didn't know who we were. He'd be like, Andre Crystal Dane, boy, get over here. Or he'd say, stop doing that. Don't you come over here and stop. Or you better. He never complete sentences. And the ironic thing was that we knew exactly what he was not saying. Right? And so he would get frustrated. And so he would get to a point where he would say really outlandish things like, if he didn't like how I was responding to him, he would say, boy, you better fix your face. And so I'd go. And apparently that's not what he was talking about, because he sent me to my room. Right? And I'll never forget the one time he said, boy, you better learn how to act. Go to your room till you learn how to act. So I went to my room. I got my act together. I opened up the door to the hallway and I said, to be or not to be? And I spent more time in my bedroom. Because that's not what they were talking about. But it wasn't until I was 17 that I figured out what an attitude was and what he meant by an attitude. And so I told you earlier that my father was a pastor, so I'm a preacher's kid. And so on Sunday, we would go to church from 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we're black, but because chicken is delicious. And so on Friday night, I asked my dad for the car because my dad loves me. What does he say? What does he say? What do you think? Oh, he says, yes, he loves me, right? So he would he'd give me the keys. I'd hang out with my friends. I'd fill the car up with gas. I'd come home before curfew, and my dad would say I had what kind of an attitude? A positive or a good attitude. And what would I say about my dad's attitude? That is also a positive or good attitude. So Friday night, my dad and I are cool. Sunday, my best friend Dexter calls me at noon and says, Andre, can you pick me up for the movies? What do I know about Sunday? Church all day. But I'm 17. I'm invincible. And Jesus is my friend. So I go up to my dad and I say, Dad, can I borrow the car? And what does my dad say? Not only does he say no, he gives me a lecture about how I'm leading people to hell. Every negative consequence in my household, the ultimate consequence was that you were going to hell. Didn't cut the grass, going to hell. Didn't do the dishes, going to hell. And you can either go to hell on your own, or he'd be more than happy to show you the way. And so as a result of that, I would say my dad had what kind of an attitude? A pretty negative or a bad attitude. What would he then say about my attitude? That is also pretty bad, right? So Friday night we're cool, Sunday we got a problem. What is it that actually determines one's attitude?
Whether you have a teenager or not.
Whether you have a teenager or not. What determines one's attitude? How what? How aligned you are. Okay. What was that? There was something here. Context. Okay, so what's the context? So let's go back to your teenager analogy, right? Or your teenager. How many people have a teenager in your life? All right, cool. Has this scenario ever played itself out with your teenager? So there's something that's on the teenager's mind. They want to do something. And so they come up to you and they say, Dear gracious, kind, and beautiful adult, I would love it if you would grant me the opportunity to go to Cindy's party tonight in 5 minutes. And so you're standing there, you're like, no, I'm not letting you go to Cindy's party. You got a C on your report card. Your room is a mess. And when was the last time you did dishes? Bobby, is it her turn to do, it is your turn to do dishes. No, you can't go to Cindy's party. What happens to that kid? It's like they gained 5,000 pounds because the way they stomped, you would have thought, and then they have the nerve to go to their room and then close the door a little more firmly than they should. But then you stand there, you're thinking, you're like, you know what? They have been working with their brother pretty good, so they've been nice to their brother. And, you know, the room, we can do the room tomorrow. You know, that's not a big thing. And they did help Grandma cut the grass last week. So, you know what? I'm going to let them go to Cindy's party. And so you go knock on the dungeon door. And this gargoyle answers the door. And you say, you know what, young gargoyle? I was just thinking, you can't go to Cindy's party. All of a sudden, that little monster turns back into your child. And they go, thank you so much. And you know what happened in school today was so-and-so and so-and-so. And did you know this? So they actually want to have a conversation and talk to you. And you haven't talked to this child in 2 weeks. So what's the difference? They got what they wanted. When you get what you want, you have a good attitude. When you are denied or delayed access to what you want, you have a bad attitude. So when we have clients, coworkers, or subordinates with a bad attitude, what do we know about them for sure? They are not getting what they want. And so as a helper, we have two responsibilities to them. One is the easiest in terms of helping them change their attitude, which is to do what? Give them what they want. Give them what they want. So when I taught high school, I always had these archetypes that show up every semester as classes rotated. And there was always this kid who sat in the back who wanted attention. And he typically wanted to try to take attention from me, which was not going to happen because we don't have power struggles in my classroom because I have all the power. I know it was bad. So what I would do is, I knew he wanted attention. Guess what I did? I gave him what he wanted. I just didn't give it to him how he thought he was going to get it. So I would take that kid who was sitting in the back of the class and try to disrupt, and I made him my assistant. And so he would take attendance, he'd pass out papers, he'd write my notes up on the board, so he was getting attention. And because he was my assistant, that meant that he couldn't sit in the back of the room. He had to sit where? Right next to me, so I could give him my notes. So I gave him what he wanted, just not in the way that he thought he was going to get it. The second responsibility that we have is, what if a person wants something that's outside of our rules or policies and procedures? It's not something that they could either obtain or protect or even nurture. It's not something that's even good for them. Then what becomes our responsibility? To educate, okay? How's that worked when people try to educate you in terms of trying to change your attitude?
It takes a while.
It takes a while, okay? What's the other choice? So we give them what they want, but if what they want isn't helpful for them, then what do?
Provide alternatives, provide context.
We provide alternatives or we provide context. So I will tell you, this is what you will do. So you don't want to do that, so this is what you will do. How does that go over?
Provide alternatives. Together you come up with alternatives.
Okay. So ultimately, my job is to help them come up with a new goal. One of the things my parents were telling me when they were saying, boy, you better fix your attitude, what they were actually trying to say to me, and I don't know that they were articulate, obviously they weren't articulated enough to say this, but what they were saying to me is, you need to come up with a new goal. This is not going to happen, so come up with a new goal, because that new goal will help you get a better attitude. All right? So there is that. And so when we talk about goal, I talk a lot about this goal-oriented stuff. And I'd like to submit to you that there are three, Alfred Adler talks about 3 goals. I think Abraham Maslow talks about 5 or 7, depending on what diagram you want to use. But Alfred Adler talks about them in terms of 3. And he says that there are 3 things that people are constantly striving for. One is significance, the second is belonging, and the third is safety. Significance basically says that I am a person with power and influence, and that I can actually create and do things. I am purposeful, right? I have a purpose. I am significant because I have a purpose. Belonging means that I am in networks that can use, understand, and value my purpose. All right. And then finally, safety says that I am in communities that are physically, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually safe for me to do the first two things. All right? So safety, significance, and belonging. And so when we talk about this idea of culture and cultural competence, what we understand is that all cultures, all participants in a culture are looking for safety, significance, and belonging. That there is no inherent conflict between human beings. That we all want the same things. So, where does the conflict come?
There's a shortage of those things.
When is the shortage of those things? Possibly.
Maybe when there's a perceived shortage of those.
When there's a perceived shortage of those things, even closer. When there is a perceived difference in our methods of achieving those things. So, for example, there was a song in the 80s sung by Sting. I used to think it was the Police, but I was corrected in one of my trainings. It was actually Sting. And the chorus of the song was, this is back in the late 80s, the chorus of the song was, I hope the Russians love their children too. Right? So what's the context of that song? What was happening in the world in the late 80s?
Cold War.
It was the Cold War, right? So, all this fear of annihilation through nuclear bombs and all this kind of stuff. And so he wrote that song. And so why is he saying he hopes the Russians love their children too? Then they wouldn't start a war, right? So he's hoping that they wouldn't start a war. So the Russians want good things for their children, and the United States, we want good things for our children. We want the same things, but our methods for doing that are different. Communism is a different method to try to get the safety, significance, belonging. Capitalism and our form of representative democracy is a different method for trying to get to that safety, significance, and belonging. All right? So the cultures that we live in come out of a context, and that context provides the differing methods. Now, if I told you those 5 things that we wrote down earlier, those values, if I told you I was going to take one of those values away, or I was going to change one of those values, how would that go over? Would you like that? Would you like for me to take one of those or change them? No, I got a fight on my hands, don't I? But we can talk about the methods that you use to get to those values. All right? Now, you were shaking your head earlier. So, yeah, so you want to talk to me? No? Okay. And how about behind you?
I personally think that not taking capitalism into account as a background for all this stuff leaves you with that kind of positive, we all want the same thing, can't we all get along analysis that isn't taking into account that we have an economic system that by definition needs to have some people in abject poverty in order for it to continue. It wants that. That system is built to do that. So I'm curious about why you don't go there.
Because you don't give all your stuff on the first date. So there is that. And the other part is, so that's not where I go on in this particular discussion. Because the other part of that is then I have to start holding people accountable for what they're talking about, right? So, people aren't ready to be held accountable. Because remember what I talked about, the creation stuff in my faith tradition? One of the things that was not created in those 6 days was capitalism. So, that's on us, baby. Right? So, but we can talk about that stuff later. So no, but I love the can't we all get along stuff, because that's a real question. Can't we get along? We all want the same stuff. Why can't we get along? We can't get along because our contexts are different, and our cultures have developed in those contexts that were different. You remember me talking about the stolen car, right? That's a context that people live in, and so it's really hard for me to just get along when that's a context that I live with every day. When I'm still trying to play 101 years of catch up, it's real hard for me to just get over it. If I'm Irish, it's really hard for me to really talk about why, particularly in the 1800s, it was better to be a slave than to be an Irishman, because you could sell a slave. The Irish weren't worth jack. So those contexts make it difficult for us to get along. But I'd like to submit to you that those are obstacle illusions. We can pierce those illusions, those fake artificial barriers that keep us from getting along, if we go back to what we were talking about earlier around our humanity. Right? One of the things I think is really interesting, and if you haven't read this document, please read it. It is the Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations, right? So one of the things that the United Nations says that all people should have access to as a human right is something that the United States has not signed on. We don't necessarily agree with that because it doesn't fit in our capitalistic model, which is that people should have clean water. We wouldn't sign on that. That's interesting, right? That all people should have access to food and all this kind of stuff. So I'd encourage you to read that document, because it's very compelling for what we need to work on in the United States. Two more things I want to do before our time is up. And one is look at the challenges in the brown part of your handout. And what you'll see is bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination. I just want to say that discrimination is part of a legal process. In 1964, it was outlawed. There were laws put in place to make sure that we don't have discrimination. So therefore, discrimination is over. Okay, nobody's throwing a party. So if I'm at work and I get swatted on my butt by a coworker and we're not on the softball team, what do we call that? We call it a threat. We call it sexual harassment, right? So it's sexual harassment, and so there's a procedure that I follow, and it is a form of discrimination, and so therefore it is rectified through a legal process, right? So discrimination is a legal process. What is bigotry, or what is a bigot? Has one heard of a bigot, been around a bigot, seen one on TV, might actually know one? If you're one yourself, you don't have to admit it. So what is a bigot?
Something that's made racial stereotypes or cultural stereotypes and categorizes and puts all people into that category and doesn't see this individual.
Okay, so a person who has negative stereotypes about people and puts groups of people in the same category and just kind of whitewashes or washes everyone with the same kind of perception. Right, so that's one. And I don't know, most of you are not old enough to remember this television show, but there's a television show called All in the Family, and it